Greetings, dear viewer, and welcome to Purposes Crossed, where I hope that people who are called by Jesus for different purposes cross paths and exchange ideas. Recently, someone sent me the following message. Yesterday, I checked in with a person who had a breakthrough in prayer and the situation had changed and all was well. When I called, I found the situation was not well. Things were slightly better only, but damage was done. And I don't know why the person conveyed, "Yay, all is well" after prayer, when it wasn't. I'm sick of us Christians feeling the presumed pressure of having to pretend and portray a happy life. Is there any instruction anywhere that may have led people to interpret it as the meaning of "be joyful always"? Rejoice in the Lord always. Yes. So is everyone right then in doing the rejoice thing, even fakely? What a wonderful question, right? So many things to think about. So let me proceed to attempt to deal with it. At the start, we should consider the passages where the idea of rejoicing always is stated. The idea comes in two places in the writings of Paul, one from the start of his writings and the other closer to his death. Let us look at these two passages in chronological order. However, rather than look at only one single verse in which Paul tells his hearers to rejoice always, let us look at the surrounding verses as well so that we can gain some idea of the context within which Paul tells us to rejoice always. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verses 12 to 22, Paul writes, "We ask you, brothers and sisters, to respect those who labor among you and are over you in the Lord and admonish you, and to esteem them very highly in love because of their work. Be at peace amongst yourselves, and we urge you, brothers and sisters, admonish the idle, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with them all. See that no one repays anyone evil for evil, but always seek to do good to one another and to everyone. Rejoice always, pray without ceasing, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. Do not quench the Spirit. Do not despise prophecies, but test everything. Hold fast to what is good. Abstain from every form of evil." What we see here is that the command to rejoice always comes in the context of other commands. There is somewhat of a trend in the list of commands, though we should not press the matter too much. For instance, Paul begins with the command, "Respect those who labor among you." Showing another person respect is not difficult. Even if we do not like the person, we can demonstrate some level of deference. But towards the end, Paul has the command, "Give thanks in all situations." I find this quite difficult, and I dare say I am not alone in this. We may cite the example of Job, who, even after facing setbacks, the likes of which we cannot even begin to fathom, he said, "The Lord has given, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." But the book of Job cites him as a supreme example of a righteous person. What can be expected then from people like me, of whom no such claim would ever be made? And just two commands before this one, Paul says, "Rejoice always." If there is a trend, then this one's position towards the end of the list should indicate that it is a more difficult command to obey than the ones that come earlier. The other place where Paul commands people to rejoice always is in Philippians chapter 4 verses 2 to 9, where we read, "I entreat Euodia and I entreat Syntyche to agree in the Lord. Yes, I ask you also, true companion, help these women who have labored side by side with me in the gospel together with Clement and the rest of my fellow workers whose names are in the book of life. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again I will say, rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and mind in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you." Here, in the middle of making an urgent request from Euodia and Syntyche, Paul commands the recipients to rejoice in the Lord always. But Paul indicates that obeying his command would require a lot of practice on the part of the Philippians. So Paul seems to agree that what he is asking them to do is no walk in the park. He acknowledges that it would take a lot of hard work. After all, in order to think about what is true, one must be able to discern between true and false. To think about what is honorable, one must have the ability to decide what is honorable and what is not, and so on. It is when we are able to make such discernment that we will be perceived as reasonable to others. When we are people who champion the truth and support justice, people will notice. Note that people may not readily agree with what we do, but the word translated as reasonableness has ideas of gentleness and fairness. Paul is telling us to be people whom others recognize are gentle and fair and reasonable. People who aren't driven by self interest, but are genuinely driven to benefit others. When this happens, others, even if they are opposed to the message that we proclaim, will not be able to make a case against us on the grounds of unfairness or impropriety. They may still despise the message we proclaim and consider it foolish, but they will not be able to convincingly say that we are out to hurt others. In such a situation, when we face opposition, we will know that it is not because we have added to the offense of the message, but that it is because of the offense inherent in the message. So it is quite possible to add to the offense inherent in the gospel by the way we conduct ourselves. This brings us back to the idea of rejoicing in the Lord always. Let's take stock of the world around us today. It is now a few months since Russia invaded Ukraine. It has been a few weeks since Hindu priests in Kashmir were targeted and killed. It has been a few weeks since the school shooting in Texas. And the COVID pandemic rages on. Anyone who ignores such events and simply smiles, saying that he or she is rejoicing in the Lord, is being a poor witness of Jesus in the world. After all, when Isaiah told us that the servant of Yahweh was a man of sorrows, he told us he was acquainted with grief and that he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. If we Christians believe that Isaiah was speaking of Jesus as the servant, then as Jesus' representatives in the world, we must weep over the things that Jesus weeps over. His understandings of grief and sorrow must become ours. And if we just smile in the face of such horror, we are not rejoicing in the Lord, but making a mockery of Him. But what do we do about our lives? Most of us face ups and downs. How do we rejoice in the Lord always through life's ups and downs? Do we just put on a mask and act as though nothing is pulling us down? I don't think that God would want us to pretend that things are well. Rejoice always does not mean that we act as though everything is hunky dory with us. That would actually be denying what the command is saying, for it would mean that I can rejoice only when things are going well with me. But the command is issued in the face of the fact that life does not always go well with us. But even when it is going poorly, even when we are being dragged down, we are asked to rejoice. This means neither wearing a vapid smile that denies the reality we face, nor wearing an oppressive frown that shows the world how bad we have it now. Rather, we do not refrain from sharing with those close to us, and especially those within the church, that even though we are facing a particularly difficult time, we are not turning our back on God, but trusting Him to pull us through. We request their prayers for us to have a stronger faith and a trusting heart. We ask all of this not as a way of complaining about our lot in life. Rather, we ask for prayer in the hope that the prayers will be answered, and so that we can then share with those who have prayed for us how God has come through for us. If we have this attitude of not pretending that things are well, of acknowledging that things are going badly for us, of asking for specific prayer from those in our church, of having a hopeful heart once we have asked for prayer, and of giving testimony when God comes through, we will truly be rejoicing in the Lord always, neither wearing empty smiles nor sporting oppressive frowns, but a heart of hope that drives away all the despair that attempts to hold us captive. But if God does not answer our prayers even after a long time, we should be honest about both the fact that He hasn't answered our prayer and how it makes us feel and think. Claiming something about God that He did not do is false testimony, and we should resist the temptation to give false testimony about God just so that we can show a presentable facade to others. If our prayers remain unanswered, we should be upfront about it. We are allowed to be disappointed with God, as the Psalms of Lament and the Book of Lamentations clearly indicate. To be disappointed with God is not to lack joy. To the contrary, we can only be disappointed with those in whom we have placed our hope. Only when we had the hope that God would come through for us can we get disappointed with Him. And to be disappointed with God is to be honest with Him and honest about Him to the rest of the world. But despite the fact that God did not come through for us as we had expected, we do not give in to the temptation of severing our relationship with Him. Rather, just as we may get disappointed with a loved one and still love him or her from the depths of our being, so also we can be disappointed with God and still love Him from the depths of our being. This will be a muted joy then, and not one that goes around shouting aloud in the streets. Rather, we hold this joy close in our hearts, telling God that despite the fact that He did not come through for us as we had expected, we value the relationship with Him more than what we had asked for. We may not be able to be great witnesses for God in such a circumstance because we would be too dishonest then. However, we can tell God and our close confidence that nothing that can ever happen to us will ever get us to the point of turning our backs on Him, and that our relationship with Him is the most valuable part of our lives. This is a different face of joy than we are normally shown. This is the face of joy devoid of smiles, but also devoid of frowns. This is the face of joy in which our quiet contentment about God's presence in our lives allows us to continue despite the unanswered prayer. This is not the resignation inherent in the words like Job's when he said, "The Lord has given and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Rather, it is an engagement with God in which we have the freedom to express everything to Him because we know that, come what may, He will not reject or turn His back on us. So you see, it is possible to have different kinds of joy. The joy that shouts aloud how God came through for us, and the joy that remains in silent contentment that the relationship is more valuable than anything that we have asked for. If we allow for such a variety in expression of joy, then it is definitely possible to rejoice in the Lord always. Here's hoping that we will all accept this robust, honest understanding of joy and reject any ideas that require us to present a false front to others and thereby being false witnesses to God.